Okay, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Ashanti McGee. I'm the Grant and Access Manager for Creative West, and I want to welcome you all to the Creative West Capacity Building webinars. This webinar today will focus on emergency preparedness, and we have invited a few people, a few organizations that we work with, and yeah, we'll just look forward to sharing a lot of this information that they have to share. I also want to acknowledge our sign language interpreters, Tosh Terry and Mariah Garcia, for interpreting this webinar today. And let's see. And next, I'd like to begin with our preamble. Creative West shares a fundamental and abiding commitment to equity, accessibility, inclusion, and belonging. We recognize and greatly appreciate the extraordinary contributions of our team and the impact we seek to have in our communities in the West and beyond. We understand that trust is built slowly with communities we wish to serve that have expressed generational betrayal and trauma. Our shared commitments provide a grounding for generating spaces of trust and safety within our team and in our communities we seek to serve through our work. We are dedicated to seeing these commitments reflected in our work over time consistently. And next is our shared commitments. We value humility, learning from our mistakes, and asking questions to gain deeper understanding. We feel empowered to hold one another accountable, establish boundaries, and ask each other for help. We lean into discomfort by facing challenges and conflict with openness and grace. We stay present by listening actively, being mindful of body language, and participating to the fullest of our ability. We share from our own experiences and grow as a team through the inclusion of every individual voice. We prioritize accessibility and are mindful of our language in ensuring belonging to all. And next, I'm going to hand it over to Sierra Scott, our grant specialist.
Thanks, Ashanti, and thank you all for joining us today. As Ashanti said, my name is Sierra Scott. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the grant specialist here at Creative West. Our Zoom norms, just a friendly reminder to please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. If you'd like to rename yourself to your first and last name and your organization, if applicable, please feel free to do so. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations, so feel free to put any comments or questions in the chat as we go, and we'll get to those in the Q&A. And if you'd like to raise your hand during that Q&A, you can use the raise hand function as well. We do have live transcripts turned on, so you can view or hide those as needed. And I will hand it back to you, Ashanti.
Thank you so much, Sierra. Next, I would like to introduce our wonderful presenters that will share the information for today. Jan Newcomb with NCAPER, Ruby Lopez Harper with CERF Plus, Molly Quinlan Hayes, and we'll also have a short sharing from Carolyn Wright with the Maui Academy of Performing Arts. Now hand it over to you all.
Great, thank you so much. We have a lot of information to share, but we did want to take a moment to highlight just the kind of intention, why we're here today. and how we're going to be spending our time together for the next hour or so. So in the chat box, we do have a prompt for y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. And while you all are responding to the chat, I'm going to go ahead and share. So one of the reasons that we are here today is in response to a lot of the climate-related disaster events that have taken place over the last several months. I think it is such a timely conversation that is often had in the wake of an event happening somewhere in the country. But certainly there's never a time when reviewing, discussing, assessing, evaluating, and coming together to understand how better to support your community. There's never a bad time to have that conversation. So we're really hoping that in the time we're spending together, you will leave with a stronger understanding of the disaster management network, infrastructure, and resources that are available to support you and your community when a disaster happens. We will be sharing several resources and information in the chat box, so feel free to copy those as they come through. We'll be posting those as they relate to the content that's being shared. We also want to take a moment to inspire you with some of the stories that have come out of disaster experiences. So we're super excited to have Carolyn with us today to share a little bit about what happened and what is happening in their community. We also want to make sure that we're engaging you in thinking differently about your work forward. Because there is no science to this work, it is ever evolving, ever changing, and always responsive and adaptive, depending on the type of disaster that your community is experiencing, depending on the resources and the readiness that was in place ahead of a disaster happening, and certainly any implementation of strategies after a disaster happens better positions your community for weathering the next happening that may be coming your way. And certainly how you think about that today is going to change how you think about that next. And because we will be having a Q&A opportunity, we'll be looking forward to providing answers to any questions that may come up as you are listening to the information. And certainly, if there's anything specific, we will be monitoring the chat. And if you have anything that you want to share in your introduction in the chat, that'll be helpful as well. We'll make every attempt to make sure that we're incorporating information that's helpful to y'all. So with that, I think we do have a quick poll. Sierra, if you could put that first one up. There we go. So if y'all could take a moment, I don't know how familiar you are with Zoom polls. I feel like everybody always can use a little refresher. So you should see a pop-up that has come into the center of your monitor asking you 2 questions. Just take a moment to click on your most appropriate response, and then you'll hit submit. And in a few moments, we will share the results of your responses, and then I'll pass it to Jan.
Thanks. Could we move ahead on some of the slides? So, Sarah, you've got the control of the slides.
I think we're one more.
One more.
There.
And actually, that was what you were going to do, Ruby, the timeline.
Do the timeline.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, no, thank you for the reminder. I was like, I knew I was on deck for the opener. And so oftentimes I think folks forget that there is a practice in disaster management specifically focused on the arts and culture community and its experiences, and certainly both its own recovery and rebuilding, but also its ability to contribute to the larger response that happens in every community. Oftentimes, you'll hear the arts and culture be tapped in the aftermath for providing healing or for providing, gathering or the rebuilding of community in in the wake of those experiences. But the disaster management practice is not a new a practice. It has been around since, well, the best to our timeline tracking, 1972, when Hurricane Agnes flooded. Created floods. So there were a number of experiences that each of these timeline moments mark in terms of a shift or a codifying of practice or an enhancement or implementation of policy that shifts and changes the way that we think about disaster response in the arts. From 72 to 85, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, also known as CERF Plus, was formed as a mutual aid response, artists helping artists. So craft artists across the country would gather at these marketplaces and festivals that were happening on a consistent basis. They got to know each other, they cared about one another, and as they were experiencing different emergencies or disaster experiences in their livelihood, they would come together and pass the hat to support one another. And so that was really, I think, one of the kind of important establishment of a discipline-specific, mutual aid-inspired relief fund that now runs and has been running. We celebrate 40 years this year on an ongoing basis, providing that type of support. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew happened. It certainly, again, just created another opportunity for conversation and for gathering, for trying to understand how these disasters are informing and guiding the way that we think about our practice. HENTEF was formed in 1995 as a kind of sub-program under FEMA that provides specific gathering information, resources, and training around heritage preservation. And oftentimes that is, rescuing items. It's taking care of collections. It's gathering, museums and folks that have these kind of tangible ephemera that needs to be cared for after a disaster happens. In 1999, we experienced as a country the Columbine High School shooting. That really opened the dialogue for what does disaster encompass? How do we begin defining and engaging and organizing around what then felt like a very marked moment of a shift in how we think about disaster and what disaster can mean, and starting to really understand more deeply the after effect of the disaster when it isn't climate related, and the necessary infrastructures that need to come together. Mental health became more in the forefront. I do want to make sure that we have enough time, so I'm going to kind of hit just the highlights from here forward. In 2006, the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response was established, coming out of the flooding that happened in the New Orleans area following Katrina and Rita, and the massive displacement that took place. It really gave the practice itself an opportunity to come together and start examining our practices and how do we serve collectively and individually communities and meet them in their moment. Forwarding again, the racial reckoning then that took place during the pandemic in 2020. Certainly there were more moments that sparked other activities. We had the Performing Arts Readiness Program that launched in 2017. Hurricane Harvey, Irma, and Maria created another umbrella that really brought major community movements together, and really in that moment brought Puerto Rico into the conversation in a way that has changed and shifted how we think at the national level about who is left out and who needs to be included, and how do we build those relationships ahead of time so that we are both being proactive and being responsive when a disaster happens. Certainly the pandemic in 2020 has changed everything about everything. But in this moment, it gave us an opportunity to understand how to better leverage federal funding, both at the kind of national level, down through the state, down through the counties, down into the communities themselves. And it really illuminated how important it is for communities to take the lead in disaster and emergency response efforts. and certainly how we think about the recovery process. Flash forward to 2020, and certainly we still continue to experience climate-related events, and at a large scale, the hurricanes continue to create a lot of damage and opportunities for us to figure out how to work together. So that work continues ongoing. In 2023, NEA Creative Forces has started to take interest in arts and healing and arts and health in the wake of a disaster. So that's opened up a new dialogue as well. Up to 2024, which we are 29 days away from, the biggest movement to tell you that the long game exists. After a 20-year advocacy process, the FEMA Individual Assistance Program implemented several changes that created the opportunity for individual artists to more easily access tool replacement as part of that program. And so NCAPER and CERF Plus certainly have been playing lead roles in providing feedback, gathering community input, and navigating folks on the ground through that process, and then providing that feedback back to FEMA so that they understand how those changes are now being experienced and not just moving through the implementation process. And these changes continue to happen. So we just recently, as many of you know, have experienced a massive event in the Appalachian region, most specifically kind of epicentered in Western North Carolina. Hurricane Helene and Milton created just, effect and destruction from Florida to Tennessee and sideways. And continuing in this vein of innovation, there is now a piloted program through the Craft Emergency Relief Fund of an extended relief grant that is distributed in monthly installments, mirroring some of the work that happened during the pandemic around guaranteed basic income, but focused on the recovery process. So providing these monthly installments over a year's period to see how and if that will stabilize, in particular, the craft community in how they're participating and how we can support them until the recovery process starts to stabilize a little bit more. So stay tuned for more updates. This timeline has already been adjusted and will continue to be adjusted. And so, yeah, it's a living, breathing practice, which is just so amazing and so frustrating, and so many opportunities for us to do better work together. And with that, I'm going to say thank you and move it back to Jan. And Sierra, if you want to go ahead and close out the poll.
No, just move it forward. That's all. Next slide. Thanks, Ruby. Okay. I saw somebody in the chat asking about just wanting to know about the resources. So this slide really gives you all the organizations that Ruby was talking about on the timeline, but also kind of what we do. And we're going to explain a little bit more about NCAPER. And then Ruby will talk a little bit about CERF Plus again. And then Molly is going to really talk about disaster response and what readiness is and a readiness plan and things like that. And then we'll have Carolyn talking about the real life experiences in Maui and what she went through. So this slide shows you the partners and resources that were working together to promote readiness, response, and recovery in the arts. And that really goes back to Katrina, who was really the event who kicked us in the behind, I should say. And we realized that the art sector was very, very vulnerable, that FEMA had a definition of cultural resources which didn't really include individual artists and arts organizations. So we have been working since 2006, and of course, CERF Plus was working before that. And our new friend in town, the Performing Arts Readiness Project, was started in 2016-17, really. And that was to really look at the difference in readiness for performing arts versus galleries and museums and libraries. There's really a huge difference, and we're trying as a group to work for organizations and artists of all disciplines to become ready because we need you. The community, the whole community needs you. So these are some of the Alliance for Response is mainly focused with cultural resources. They do have the responders, which are wonderful. Like now they have a whole thing on soot removal for people in California that maybe your house didn't burn down completely, but you have so much cleaning up to do. And so they're really specifically geared to helping problems and conservation of family photos and things like that. So all these organizations really are working on behalf of, we're working together and trying to make sure that rather than working separately, we can help everybody at once. So on the next slide is really about the coalition itself. I said it was founded in 2006, and it really, if you go to the next slide, it shows you these are organizations on our steering committee. And so you see that Performing Arts Readiness and CERF are on it, but also Music Cares, which they focus on musicians and those working in the music world. So it's not just people behind a mic, it's the people who put the mic together and do all the technical aspects. And they have been really funding a lot in the West Coast at this point. Entertainment Community Fund down on the lower left used to be the Actors Fund. They're extremely active in what's going on in California right now because they have many funds to support, again, both performers in film and theater, but in front of the curtain and behind the camera as well. So National Assembly of State Arts Agencies is a wonderful partner. New York Foundation for the Arts, South Arts, which is another regional organization like Creative West, and Grant Makers in the Arts, Americans for the Arts. You can see that we have, and this is the group that we pull together in our response calls to actually give information and to help people understand how to go after support in whether it's financial, mental health help. I mean, it's the whole kit and caboodle. On the next slide, we talk about NCAPER really recognizes twin realities. The lack of emergency preparedness within creative communities and the lack of support after disaster really puts us in a vulnerable position. And what's even worse is that the arts are really important in the healing aspect. So it's just like when you're on an airplane and they say, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help someone who is not able to do that. That's what we're trying to help get the arts sector really understanding. You must be prepared so you're ready to help your entire community in planning and mitigating future events. It's very critical that the arts are part of that recovery process. So I'm going to turn it back to Ruby. I don't know if you have any more to say about CERF. I just put in a couple of slides here, but
Yeah,
take
no,
it away.
the quick that I'll share, because I did make a mention of a few key points. We have been around for 40 years. We are the only organization of our kind in the field, both in arts and culture and in philanthropy. The grants that we give are open 24/7, 365. So oftentimes when a disaster happens and there's a craft community in that area, we will get phone calls just because this is what we're built for. And certainly that came to light after the hurricane in North Carolina, given that we saw an incredible surge of applications. We processed over 600 applications, or over 800 applications, gave over 600 grants, and that is what we would have done over a normal 3-year period. So certainly for us, it's an indicator that this work is getting more important, not less important. And so moments like this are just so vital in sharing information, getting resources out, certainly being connected to the community. We often will work with folks on the ground as well to coordinate the efforts to really focus on the needs as they're being communicated to us. And we can also share what we know by mining the data that we get. So in the case of the LA wildfires, we're able to already tell them, you know, we've seen over 100 applications come through. We've only funded just over 60. Here's everything that's not been fundable. So there's gaps. And then here's everything that has gone through. And so we're able to at least be responsive in that way. It's so important to have relationships ahead of a happening. And I think, again, moments like this give you an inside look at who's out there. And right now, before something happens, gives you the opportunity to learn more about organizations like ours, so that when something happens, that phone call is even easier to make. The other thing I'll share is we do have readiness resources as well. We have $1,000 grants that we do twice a year. Those are selected on a lottery system because we do still currently have demand outpacing supply for the resources that we have available. But they're really incredible support structures that are more necessary and more needed. So for funders on the call today, think about how you can help bring these types of activities into your eligibility and into the examples that you share with grantees as they're applying for your resources. That readiness and recovery projects are so important, and an easy fix, easy to call them out and call them up as you're writing your guidelines. So just something to think about. We also have resources and trainings available on our website. As you can see, we do offer educational webinars. We do those on demand. And then we also can work with organizations and groups of artists to provide more customized content. And then we do have a number of opportunities for folks to get involved through storytelling, writing, certainly helping act as an ambassador in your community, getting these resources out. And then we're always looking for folks to join the leadership of the organization. So if you're interested in being on the board, we have an open invitation on our website for that as well. Just by the numbers through 2023, we've given over $1 million, almost $2 million. Just in the last 2.5 months, we've done almost $3 million. So it's a whole different landscape. And we're only at the other very beginning of our fiscal 25 year. As you can see, we did just over $1 million for COVID related grants. And we've been really pushing at increasing our reach through the Get Ready grants. So those continue to grow as well.
Great.
Thank
Molly. Molly, you're going to be the focuser here.
Great. So now we've given you the whole landscape that's out there, but now we're going to ask you to home in on your organization or your creative practice and think about how all of these resources might be put to bear to make you more ready and resilient. So just for the purposes of today's conversation, I'm offering up a few definitions. Readiness as being in a posture to be resilient and prepared for whatever crisis, emergency, or disaster may arise. And it doesn't have to be a major natural disaster to be devastating. If your theater is flooded because of a broken water pipe, that can be just as devastating and harmful as if it was damaged in a hurricane. So really being ready for whatever might be around the corner. And a readiness plan, as you think about how to put that together, it seems very abstract. But in my work with helping organizations create readiness plans, I've kind of crystallized it down to three things: documents, processes, and trainings. That basically it's a decision process. You have decided what your organization is going to do if something unexpected occurs. So these are the steps that we're going to take. This is where the important information is kept, and everybody has been trained in what they're authorized and responsible to do. So you build that organizational muscle, train it over time. It's never done. So you're always getting better and getting more resilient and more ready as time goes on. Next slide, thanks. So we also recommend that you think about an all hazards planning approach. Because there are a lot of threats out there. There's certainly value to do a risk assessment for your organization or your practice and say, what are my biggest risks? Do I have a large facility that I'm trying to maintain and manage? Is my studio have hazards in it that I need to mitigate? But you also just want to think about the holistic nature of what you do, so that whatever crisis hits you, you've figured out what your backup plans and policies and procedures for all of your critical business functions. If you can't access your facility, what's your backup plan? If you can't access your tech, what's your backup plan? If your access to funding is suddenly gone. In Asheville, we saw a lot of that. You had to have cash. Nothing was working electronically. So thinking about all that, you put that information together, review the lessons learned as emergencies come your way. You're always going to respond to them. Update your plan, and then again, keep going in that ever improving cycle. So these are some things that we think about in an all hazards readiness plan in terms of the actual pieces. Remember, this is all based on making your decisions, because there's no cookie cutter plan that's good for everybody. It's got to be customized for you and your situation. But these are the likely pieces. Some sort of introduction, so that someone new to your organization understands why this is important and how this was put together. What are your evacuation and shutdown plans? What's your emergency communication plan? If a crisis hits, how are you going to get in touch with your board, your staff, your volunteers, your guest artists? What are your emergency and response procedures if there is a medical event, a fire event, an intruder? What are the backup plans for your key people? If suddenly your finance director is not available to come in, it really doesn't matter whether that's because they were in a car accident, or because their mother got sick and they had to go to Tulsa, or because they eloped and went off to Tahiti. They're gone. What are you going to do? Is someone able to step in? Having resource lists put together ahead of time. We put a lot of information in the chat, links to resources. We'll be doing that throughout the afternoon. Knowing who you might be able to call so you can do that at a moment's notice. Making sure that all of your insurance information and finance information is centralized. You have two people who can conduct your banking, so that there's always a backup. And again, making sure that you protect your artistic assets and your business data. Having backups, having offsite backups. I was heartbroken when I read that the Schoenberg Library in LA, it's not his original music manuscripts, but a lot of copies that they lend out all over the world. They had them all backed up, and their backups were on site, and the entire thing burned. So it's all gone. So, think about how you're going to protect what is really the most unique thing about which is your work, your creative work. Next slide. So quickly, the objectives of putting an all hazards readiness plan together are to identify and protect your staff, your artists, your audience members, and what are your most important assets and records. You want to reduce the risk of disaster. So think about what are the things that you can mitigate against, improving your capability to resume operations after disaster. You want to be able to get up and ready and going again as quickly as possible. And then to really increase your ability to recover from damage to or loss of assets. So how soon can you become again opened your community? How soon can you, we saw that a lot in COVID. How am I going to maintain relevancy to my community to keep those people connected? So with that, I think we're ready for this polling question. And I think for this one, we're going to ask you to put some answers in the chat. So if you, how ready do you feel that you could respond if something were to happen in your community? And I'm just going to have a quick look-see here. Somewhat ready. Okay, so a lot of people kind of in the middle. Somewhat ready, not ready. I think that's fair. One of my kind of, oh, thank you, Sierra. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Okay, so almost 2/3 of you feel that you're somewhat ready and about 1/3 not ready. It's great to acknowledge that. One of my kind of mantras is no guilt. You start where you are. And we hope that we give you some ideas today of how you can begin. And then the second question, thank you, Sierra. How prepared are you or your organization to respond or be of support during a disaster event? Do you have reserve funding, any kind of access to capital? Do you have emergency communications plans that can work internally and externally? Let's have you answer that. Okay, good. Well, some people feel they're ready. That's excellent. Utah Division prepared. We have a plan. Excellent. So again, these questions here are pieces of that plan that you want to develop if you don't have them and revisit at least annually if you have something in place to make sure it's up to date. Great. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Jan to introduce our beloved friend and colleague, Carolyn Wright.
Thank you, Molly. And thank you, Carolyn. Carolyn's from Maui, and I'm going to let her talk about, but after those wildfires, we became such good friends because she was the one on the ground who really had she knew where people were. She knew what the needs were. And well, I'm going to let her talk about it, but I'm just so glad to see you, Carolyn, and to know that your work has really made a difference. And I think it's helpful for people who are experiencing the fires in California now, that you made it through. Things are different, but you made it through. And so we're going to let you talk as long as you want about, what you experienced and how you dealt with it.
Well, thank you, Jan. I'm Carolyn Wright, Executive Director of Maui Academy of Performing Arts. And as you all know, this horrible disaster that happened on Maui on August 8th, 2023, just had massive impacts on the entire island. We, of course, lost the town of Lahaina, thousands of structures, more than 100 lives, but fires also had sprung up in other places on the island. So other homes were lost in Kula and Olinda. And on Maui, we like to say, instead of having 6 degrees of separation, we really only have 2 degrees of separation. We're such a small, tight community. And so that ripple effect, even for people who were not just immediate survivors of the fire, everybody was impacted. My organization, MAPA, is based in Wailuku, and we're about 10 miles away from Lahaina as the crow flies, but about 20 miles by road. So, we're a bit of a distance away from Lahaina, but we were just deeply impacted by it. Many of the people that were that are involved in MAPA had homes that were lost. So our stage manager lost her apartment, a teaching artist lost her apartment. We had many donors who lost their homes. one donor who lost her home and her husband. He stayed behind to try to protect the home that he had built with his own hands, and the fire took him. And we had 2 former board members who lost their homes, and then many of our families. We are a theater company, a nonprofit theater company that also has an academy program where we teach people of all ages dance and drama. And many of our families were impacted, if not directly by losing their home or a family member. Many people on Maui were impacted economically because, of course, the economy on Maui is so deeply tied to tourism. And so when any kind of disruption happens in the tourist industry, whether it was the pandemic or then the fires, people lose jobs or at least have reduced hours. And so there were lots and lots of people who were impacted economically, even if they still had their homes standing. They just weren't able to make ends meet anymore because the tourists weren't coming. And so I was fascinated by those polls. If I had taken that poll on August 7th, 2023, I would have been, we were unprepared. We were completely unprepared as an organization for any kind of disaster. And I would actually say that as a whole community, we were relatively unprepared. We live in paradise, and we tend to feel safe here. We feel protected. And even though we're in the path of hurricanes, we have the big giant mountains over on the Big Island of Hawaii that tend to protect the island of Maui from a direct hit from hurricanes. So we just had that attitude like, well, probably won't ever happen here. What a mistake to not be prepared. So immediately following the fires, in the immediate hours and days, the government, the local government, wasn't really stepping in the way that the community needed. And so it was the community that stepped in to help each other. And the artists on the island were really leading the way on many of those initiatives. So, for example, one of the things that happened was the people had gotten spread out all over the island, the people who were the survivors. They went to stay with friends and family. Some of them stayed in hotels on the west side, but they needed everything. Of course, they needed clothing and diapers and food and everything. And so the community, just regular people in the community, and many of them people from the artist community, set up these community hubs. And so other people in the community would donate things, and you'd go to somebody's carport or garage or a business and drop off whatever you had to donate. And then the survivors could come there and pick up whatever they needed for free. It really was the spirit of aloha, bringing us together and helping us as a community move forward through those early days. As the days went by and then turned into weeks and then turned into months, life still wasn't really getting back to normal because of the trauma that the entire island was feeling collectively. However, the arts community, we were so lucky that NCAPER came along. I just remember one day I opened up my email and there was this email from Jan saying, hey, we're this group and we're doing a Zoom meeting and we're inviting every artist on Maui to participate. And so I tried to spread the word to everybody that I knew. And I don't know, I think I missed a couple of those NCAPER meetings, but I was at most all of them because the information and the inspiration that we got from just hearing from other people who knew about this, because we were just so naive. We didn't really know anything about the role of the arts in terms of disaster response, disaster recovery. I had just truthfully never thought about it. And so, and I think that's partially because living here and we felt so protected. But now, of course, thanks to NCAPER and the other organizations opening our eyes to the role that we as the artists can play in helping our community recover, we shifted so much programming in order to for example, choose shows. We produce a lot of theater, and so we chose titles and wrote plays that were all about hope and healing. And that's one of the beautiful tools of the arts community, is this capacity to help our community connect with their own humanity and connect with one another and not feel so isolated. And so we did, for our big summer show last year, we did Man of La Mancha, which of course with its iconic song, The Impossible Dream, is really all about how do we, in the darkest of times, how can we still look and see the light and have optimism that we can move forward together with our beliefs. And we are about to open another show for our keiki, our children, which is called Pigs from the Sea. And it is based on a true story from Okinawa. And it's about how one community helped another community in times of disaster. And we're exploring that intersection between aloha and, now I forgot the word off the top of my head, but it's an Okinawan value that means kind of coming together and helping one another, yuimaru. And so our programming really shifted because of our experience here with the fire. We saw some immediate responses to sending teaching artists over to the west side where Lahaina is, of the impact of the arts on people's recovery. I'll just give you one quick example. We were sending teaching artists over to the hotels where the survivors were staying. So whole entire families in one hotel room, but that was all some of the families had. And so we were setting up downstairs in the lobby and the ballrooms and little meeting rooms. And we were providing opportunities for people to just enjoy the arts, whether it was drawing and painting or hula or puppetry or whatever it was. And we had one teaching artist who went over and she was doing hula. And we learned some important lessons that we had ideas of what we thought the survivors were ready for. And we learned very quickly that we had to listen to them very carefully about what they were ready for and what they weren't ready for. And so with the hula experience, our kumu hula, that's a hula teacher, went over every single week and did a session. And at the beginning, nobody wanted to dance. They just said, no, we just want to watch you dance. We'll just watch. And so she danced. And then little by little, more and more people would get up and dance as the weeks went by. But there was one older woman who had told the kumu hula that she had been a hula dancer before, a professional hula dancer, but she didn't want to dance. She just wanted to sit in the back and watch. And then one day she came and told the hula teacher, she said, I almost didn't come today because life isn't worth living for me anymore. And I had plans for how I was going to end my life. And then I thought about you. And I realized that if I don't come to this hula class today, you're going to wonder where I am. So here I am. And then she danced that day. And to us, that was just the most beautiful story of how the arts can impact individuals and communities. And so she's still here with us, that woman, and we're so grateful for the arts that she still has her life. A couple we're almost out of time, and I know we want to do questions, so I'll stop there, but I just wanted to share one really quick lesson that
Please go ahead and share it. Yeah.
Okay. This is sort of echoing one of the things that Ruby said in terms of connecting with each other. One thing that we learned during the pandemic as an arts community on Maui was the importance of getting to know each other. And we put together this little alliance, and we would meet on Zoom, and we would share ideas about how to get funding, and we would brainstorm with each other about, how do we bring our programming back in a way that's safe for the participants. And we really got to know each other well, including organizations that before the pandemic had been competitive with one another. And so after the fires, we were able to leverage those collegial relationships and and create programming for our entire community. Rather than each of us trying to create individual programs, we came together. So that Teaching Artists program that I talked about on the West Side was a collaboration of many, many organizations coming together to do that. And so I can't encourage you strongly enough. Call up your colleagues from other organizations and go have coffee, get to know each other, because somewhere down the road, if you end up in a disaster, those relationships will really benefit not only your organization and their organization, but the whole community. I'll stop there.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much, Carolyn. It really means a lot to hear those stories and to realize that you can make it through and be better.
Yes, you will make it through. You can make it through.
So we have one more slide, I think, is about the D-Plan Arts Ready. But if you want to take a break, Shanti, is that?
We can take a break, if that's fine. I was planning to have everyone take a break before questions, but I think that this is a good area as a stop. Again, if that works. Okay, so we're just going to stop for 5 minutes and we'll come back on the hour. I'd say maybe about 1 minute on the hour. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This is Molly again with NCAPER. We're going to share just another little bit of information and then we'll have time for questions and conversation. For those of you, again, looking at your responses in the chat, we saw a mix of those who feel somewhat ready and those who feel not ready. And those are both fine places to be, but we hope that today we're getting your thoughts going on how to go about planning. There is, however, so that if you don't want to kind of, start on your own, there is this online tool that can help you and your team build your plan. It's called D-Plan Arts Ready, and it is a combination of tools from the arts and the cultural institution side. So whether you are an organization that's people-based, like a theater company or a dance company, or whether you're an object-based entity, such as a museum or a collection, it's all built in to help you. So D-Plan actually walks you through, it's kind of a risk assessment. It presents you with questions in all of what we call your critical business functions. So your people, your programs, your facility, your IT, your financials, your programs, your assets, and then helps you decide, okay, what are my biggest risks? Where am I already ready? Because even those of you who said you're not ready, you probably are. You just haven't thought about it that way. So collecting information into a centralized place, talking out the assumptions you have in your head about what you would do or who would take control, and doing all those kinds of things are a place to get you started. So you probably have a leg up on yourself that you don't know about. But this tool actually lays that all out and lets you decide, yeah, I'm ready here and here, I'm not ready here. This is really a gap that we need to fill right away. This is something that can wait for 3 months. So it's a subscription tool, but there is a code where you can get a free year subscription. And if you go to this website, or if you email Jan, we'll put her email in the chat. You can just request an annual a waiver for the annual subscription. So we hope that you will check that out as a way to get going, and it's a great team exercise as well.
They actually have to go to the dplan.org to get the form that comes to me. But one thing I wanted to say is this is a wonderful team building opportunity for organizations, because you don't want to be a lone wolf filling this out. You want to involve people within your entire organization. And having run 10 arts organizations in my career, I'd say I, as the CEO, is probably the least important person involved in this kind of planning. But you want to really get a culture of preparedness as a part of your core entity and part of your mission. So this is a really easy way to start that kind of conversation. And I tell people, use staff meetings to kind of walk through these things and asking people who do different tasks and have different responsibilities within your organization. So with that, I think we can move on to questions. And that's where our contact information is, but you can get it from Ashanti as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for sharing. Let's see. Rachel Hedman said, not sure on questions. We have events that are sometimes outside and could be colder than planned. For example, May Summit and Festival, rain, drought, flash floods, etc. Do you have anything that maybe you could share with them to, for them to maybe consider?
Well, I think a best practice is for any program that you're running is to have an alternate facility, whether that is a rain location or someplace indoors. One of the things that we really recommend is that you have a buddy, a battle buddy. Maybe there's another institution, another performing arts group, or another festival space where you agree ahead of time, hey, if your program can't be held where you plan it, you can use our space and vice versa. And that way, you don't have to do a big, long, complicated search and you're not stuck the day of. You kind of have that agreement ahead of time. So that can be for programming space, it can be for rehearsal space, it can be for exhibit space, it can be for office space. As Carolyn said, that kind of networking and getting to know each other and share resources ahead of time can really pay off when the crisis occurs.
And your meteorologist is your best friend. Having run orchestras where we do outdoor performances, I mean, I felt like I was like on, fast line with the meteorologist. And I remember Jacob's Pillow, the dance organization, actually hired, there was a local guy around New York who was everybody's favorite, and he became the meteorologist of Jacob's Pillow because they have all those outdoor performances. The other thing is to know what your state laws are as far as the number of people who are trained to respond when you have a large amount of people. You have some states say every 200 people there must be a trained either an off-duty police officer or someone who is aware of crowd control issues and things like that, because panic can happen very quickly. And if you're not prepared for how to handle that and your people, you don't have enough people on the ground to understand that, you really need to be aware of that. It's a must, and it should be built into your budget.
The last thing that I'll share, probably more focused on kind of outdoor festival style, marketplace, artist gatherings, is make sure that you're talking to the artists about the anchor systems that they're using with their tents. Because a lot of the emergency requests that we get is for support from festival organizers asking how we can support the artists that have lost their displays, all of their inventory, their tents, their chairs, their tables, their everything, because an unexpected weather system moved through and levels the festival. I think it's important to think about what your resources are before you move into that space. What conversations have you had with the artists about their equipment? How can you help resource them in advance of what's happening? Even doing a simple webinar training for the artists that are there on site so that they understand that this is what you can expect. If we get word of a weather system, we're going to let you know, this is how we're going to let you know, and these are the things you're going to need to do in order to, kind of hunker down and get through it. And then what is your response, once that weather system passes? What are resources that you can share with the artists that are then affected? So back to, just kind of the theme of the conversation, what you do in the lead up to a moment can decide how well you're going to weather and get to the other side to stabilize. And if you aren't doing any of this, it really is going to be worse.
Right. Also, I would say go to performingartsreadiness.org and look at their list of recorded webinars. There's one on festival safety, I believe, maybe one or two, and a lot of the information that we've given. And you can do it at 2 a.m. You can listen to it for free. So these are really helpful. And some of the people giving this information, like one is from Emma Stewart from England, was like one of the top London Olympics safety persons. So, I mean, these people are used to having to deal with a lot of people and a lot of issues. So you can do a lot of research on your own.
Thank you all. Some more questions are coming into the chat. Margot Geddes asked, I was wondering if anyone had some suggestions for training staff. We have an EMP, but struggle to come up with ways to train with it. I thought of creating a board game.
I think that we've had success at NCAPER. We've done a couple of conferences lately where we've done tabletop exercises. So you just kind of break a team into groups and present them with a scenario. They have to kind of think through, and then you throw a little wrench in. So it's much more engaging, and it also, again, surfaces assumptions people have in their head about how it's going to go. Someone else had mentioned in the chat that they have a plan, but they haven't tested it. So that's another good way to test out your plan, is to just play out some scenarios and see how people actually respond. Do you need to tweak it? Do you need to clarify your communications? But again, I think that just, presenting the plan is not enough. You have to give people a chance to kind of live it.
And debrief after every emergency. It's really important to have that, because what you might have assessed as being extremely important didn't happen, and you planned for the wrong thing, or you were surprised by something. So you want it's a living document. So you want to make sure corporate memory is there and not lost. We lose people right and left. So there's Molly helped develop this tool that's on the NCAPER.org. It's the arts organizations at a crossroads. And there's this wonderful tool of it's having staff people share information about their jobs. I can tell you that your job description is not what you do. I mean, it's some foreign thing, but what these conversations and questions bring up are, what do you do on a daily basis? Who do you interact with weekly, and how do you do, so someone else in your organization has this information. I mean, Molly mentioned, 2 people having bank privileges or whatever, but this goes beyond that. It becomes, a nice tool for making sure corporate memory is there. And when you lose someone, you haven't lost everything with their leaving.
And the tool is something that you can use with 2 people. So it's kind of, you can cross-train them both at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is nice. Another thing I would say, and this kind of goes to the question, but also back to what Jan was saying about building the culture. Sometimes people are afraid to talk about scary things. I think that with COVID, we became much more, unfortunately, fluent in crisis communications, but it's still kind of scary. And the story that I'll tell, I used to work with South Arts, another regional, and we ran the Performing Arts Exchange. It was one of the big regional booking conferences. And it was huge. It was like our biggest revenue source. there were, 500-600 people, 2 nights of artist showcases. I mean, it was a, huge deal. And we, as we started to get into this work after Katrina and Rita actually said, let's just talk about this. We brought in all of our contractors. We said, okay, what if the city that we're going to be in has a hurricane? What if the theaters where the showcases are supposed to happen have a power outage? What if? And it was such a relief for everybody to get their worst fears out on the table. And then for us to brainstorm and think about this is what we would do. Our hotel broker said, well, if you had 3 weeks notice, this is what I could do for you. And our technical person said, well, I know people in Miami and we could do this. So it gave people power and agency in a way that they didn't feel like they had before. So that's just as you're talking with your staff, I would say, make people feel comfortable expressing their concerns or risks that they see or worries that they have, and know that they're going to be supported and you can figure something out.
It's definitely important, I think, to normalize the conversation. That's the thing that I really push on folks, that none of us have the right answer, and none of us are going to mitigate to zero. There will always be a level of risk inherent in the process and inherent in every plan, because you can't plan for everything, and the unknowns are always going to be there. But if you do an annual staff retreat, schedule an hour to talk about disaster readiness. Do we feel ready? You could mirror it along this line, have somebody come in and talk about what is most likely to happen so that people can have a sense of awareness, and then follow through with, okay, well, now we've talked about these things. Now, what is the plan that we're going to be? Does everybody know where the plan is? Does everybody know? We talk about that for our handbooks. We talk about that for our standard operating procedures. We talk about that around policies and practices, but we don't talk about that as a field and a practice about disaster readiness and preparedness, and certainly not the response. And I think that a lot of organizations have so much opportunity to connect and be a connector in the time of a disaster, or however you're defining disaster. We saw a lot of organizations responding during the civil unrest and racial reckoning that took place in 2020 as shelter, as gathering point, as resource distribution, as a safe place. And so all of those things are also part of how you can think about this work, that it isn't just dealing with a weather system or dealing with, an unexpected happening. Things can just happen every single day, and your organization is a part of a larger fabric of a community that requires connection, understanding, resource, information. And depending on the nature of the work that you're doing, you also have to think about all of the people that are going to be under your umbrella. Carolyn talked a little bit about, this is how folks were responding and connecting to the community that they served, because they were no longer able to come to a place. So you have to go where they are. Do you know where they're going to go if something happens? Are you ready to even support your staff, your board, your volunteers, the participants that come to your programs? How are you getting information out? So I think there's so many facets. So one thing I'll say, there's so many facets to this work, and you're probably sitting here thinking, how am I ever going to do any of it? Pick one thing, and do that. And then when you've had that conversation, figure out what it means, pick the next thing, and keep adding. This is building block work. This is not, assemble a house in a day kind of work. Like, it really takes time and energy, and it is okay to just start with one thing.
And use it as part of your onboarding for new staff and board members, even volunteers for sure. I mean, when I was at Rochester Philharmonic, we had to, we trained our volunteer ushers at least twice a year, twice a season. So it was important that they understood how to get people in and out, and who manages the wheelchairs and things like that. It's really important training. and debriefing.
Thank you all. There's another question in the chat that Ruby had answered a bit, but if you wanted to expound on that, the question is, what is the budget for having security or responder help on grounds so we can plan for it?
I mean, so part of the challenge of this work is that there is no cookie cutter answer. I can't tell you without knowing what is the size of your event, and even with knowing that I don't know each resource in every community. So it's just some things to think about. The size of your event, the size of your audience that's going to attend the event, the location of your event, the hours of your event. And oftentimes I just suggest to folks that they get in touch with their local police department and talk about what resources are available. If they are not available as a resource, they typically have information that they can share with you. Also, folks in the city planning or city permitting departments will often have resources that they may require. So some cities have requirements of, if you're going to have this many people on this kind of in this kind of an event, you have to have this many folks, and here's who you call, and they'll provide that for you, and they'll charge you a fee. And sometimes it's scalable, and sometimes it's reasonable. So it just kind of depends on the location, the event, and the resources that are available in that community. And then I think there's always, contractors that you can hire as well. And, the mall always has security. You can ask them who they work with. So back to, again, develop relationships with people in your community, and they're going to have this information for you.
Knowing your first responders is really important, and your emergency management people in your county or parish or whatever.
And
Very
they're always
important.
looking for trainings as well for their staff. So if you have a space, offer it up, offer to host their next training, because then you get to know them, they get to know your space, builds those relationships.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna read one more question. If anyone else has any other questions, please put them in the chat now. We've got about 10 more minutes. This question is, what are the best ways to consider people with disabilities during emergency planning?
Molly, you're probably the most facile on that information from your work. You have mute.
Sorry. Thank you for asking the question. Yes, they need to be considered. I was going to say, Ashanti, I know, does some work in this area as well. And I would say that certainly there's physical safety that's important. Understanding, access, really who is going to be responsible for making sure, for instance, if you need to evacuate, so that someone is assigned to make sure that they're evacuating. But also, as in any other situation, people with disabilities have self-agency. So asking them if they need help in an emergency first before you assume is always important. I've seen some great examples beyond just making sure that, you have wheelchair and scooter exits. Things that are not expensive, but just take a little thought. For instance, if you have emergency instructions, I always recommend you have a script so that if you need to clear the space, you know what you're going to say. Have that printed and laminated. The ushers have it. So if someone is deaf or hard of hearing, you can show them something that they can read. Is really easy to do. There are temporary wheelchairs that you can have. Sometimes if there is a real unexpected event, or if someone injures themselves during the event and needs to be transported out, then it's easy to get them exited. And again, working with your first responders so that if you have an area of safe refuge or a particular wheelchair seating, that they know where those locations are. Those are all kind of, I think, critical first steps to take.
Also, chain of command is very important. in that if you're in a performance and something happens in the performance, most likely the stage manager is the person who's going to call the shots on how, are we going to have evacuation or whatever. So people need to understand that in your communications, not only to your stakeholders and your donors and your patrons, but also to your staff and volunteers. So they know, okay, if something happens, the stage manager or the front of house person is going to be the person in charge. That is so important. Otherwise, you'll get these like people who think they should be in charge. I'm in charge, I'm in charge, and they're not in charge, and you don't want them to be. So make sure that's part of that planning process that we talked about with the D Plan Arts Ready. It really brings up those questions so that you don't have to remember them. You just know, okay, in this situation, X, Y, Z.
Thank you. I have one more thing to add. I think those are fantastic responses. Adding the emergency response plan into your 501, 504 self-evaluation. If you do have artists or organizations, artists or participants with disabilities, including, an actual plan of how to get them to safety. And again, that's something that you can also co-create with their agency as well. Okay, sorry about that. I actually have a there's a horn beeping behind me, so please excuse the loudness.
Better than a Great Pyrenees barking. Stop now.
Thank you. Sierra, can we switch over to the next? Oh, sorry. So these are the email addresses, contact information. Jan,
It's if we went to the second slide, it also has Carolyn's because I bet
okay.
people want to contact Carolyn. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know what happened there, but it
Well,
gives the addresses.
I want to thank you all for sharing your expertise, your experience. Thank you for your time. And I'd like to switch it over to Creative West. We've got these, we have a few more webinars in this upcoming series. And so we'd like to, just let you know that we have more information. Next, we'll focus on sign language and deaf culture webinar. And that we have a registration for that right now. We also have board development with Christian Gaines, ADA Centers with Maggie Sims, grant writing with Sierra Scott, and Artist Thrive with Heather Pontonio. And so I've got the webinar registration in the chat. And yes, I can definitely add these emails to chat and transcript as well. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful interpreters as well for their work, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.